kidnapping is legal. Are you ready to find out what happened to Martin? What about the current battle between the Hernandez family and the state of Georgia? Or maybe you're here for the 10 things you need to know that can keep you and your family safe in a medical situation or emergency. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Cook Who Can't Eat podcast, where chronic illness and family meet at home and in the kitchen.
This episode took me a really long time to write, record, and edit. I wanted to make sure that I was thoroughly researching each and every case, that I was giving you the information you needed, but the biggest reason was that I had to keep stopping. I had to give my mind time to wrap itself around this information and families' stories. The toll medical kidnapping has on these families, especially on the children, is devastating. I couldn't believe how easily they could separate families, even when they had no proof. However, it's all legal because of the AFS Act that President Clinton signed in 2017. This legislation made it very easy for family and child services to take custody of children. By creating a definition of abuse that was so vague, it could easily be used or interpreted by social services in a way that would fit any narrative they were using. This is why medical kidnapping is such a huge threat to everyone, because it really starts with and comes down to the opinion and experience of one person. In February of 2022, a very tiny portion of an extremely long list was made public. This list contains the names, state, and crimes of social workers, primarily from various states' child protective services. Each individual has been charged and convicted for a wide variety of crimes, many of which are crimes against children. These convictions included neglect of an abused child, lewd and lascivious acts on a child, creation and distribution of child pornography, criminal enterprise exploitation of vulnerable adults, selling fake IDs, utilizing the information from foster children, financial fraud, embezzlement, bribes, assault and battery of a minor, statutory rape, healthcare fraud, and drug possession and distribution to minors. As if that wasn't bad enough, this very small portion of a very big list also contained convictions for murder, sexual battery, child human trafficking, and falsification of neglect and abuse. I could keep going, but we'd be here for hours. Well, these few, unfortunately, represent an extensive list. I do not believe that these represent all social services because they are doing a job that most people would not even consider taking on. However, it does bring into question the ability of these individuals to make a decision that can cause horrible, lasting damage to families and children. How can someone who's molesting, abusing, exploiting, or even selling minors make sound decisions on the safety of a minor? Many of the stories I shared in the episode are older, but medical kidnapping isn't something in our past. In Georgia, the Hernandez family is living this nightmare right now. In June of 2023, so just a few months ago, parents Matt and Tucky noticed some swelling in their infant's legs. They took Emma to the pediatrician who ran some blood tests and he saw some irregularities, so he referred them to the emergency room where more extensive testing could take place. The family went to the ER. The doctors there did perform a few of their own tests. They did see the same irregularities in the blood work. However, instead of digging into this, the doctor decided to report the parents to CPS for child abuse. FYI, the blood work irregularities could not have come from any type of abuse ever. They were clear indications of a chronic illness. The state immediately took Emma and placed her with her aunt. A few days later, CPS came to Matt and Tucky's home. They reportedly found a safe, loving household, and a big sister, Aria, was obviously loved and very well taken care of. Seems like a pretty glowing recommendation or report from CPS. In spite of that, the next day, the police showed up and arrested Tucky for battery and cruelty to children. At that time, Aria was also removed from the house and placed in foster care. What? Are you seeing what's happening? So, parent seeks help for baby that's having weird symptoms. They know there's irregularities. They need help, but the person that's supposed to help medically and legally kidnap their infant, they receive a glowing report from CPS. Older sibling is also removed from the home, and then mom gets arrested. And experts wonder why so many people don't want to seek medical care. Hard question, huh? During her arrest, Hucky learned that she would not be allowed to have any communication with her husband, her children, or her family. Shortly after this, Child Services checked on Emma at the aunt's house and discovered a rash on both of her feet. CPS decided it must have been one of two things. Either the aunt was also abusing Emma, or she was allowing Tucky to come over and abuse the baby before she got arrested. Are you kidding me? I have no idea what kind of abuse would create a foot rash, and neither did Google. After researching, the only time a rash is really the evidence of abuse is when it's in the diaper area. The primary skin manifestations of abuse are things like bruises, bites, burns, cuts, contusions, and even hair loss. Did you notice that nowhere on that list was randomly swollen legs or rash on feet? CPS engaged in their favorite pastime again and removed Emma from her aunt's home and admitted her to the hospital where a feeding tube was placed and other medical care was administered without parental knowledge or permission. Once Emma was released, she and her sister were placed in various foster homes while their mom fought baseless charges and their dad was fighting to get their daughters back. During Matt's first visit, he was horrified by the obvious signs of neglect and stress that he could see on both girls. Emma's legs were still swollen, and one was now slightly discolored. Aria wasn't her normal bubbly self. Instead, she was withdrawn and scared of every sound, and both girls looked exhausted and confused. When Matt reported his concern, the state refused to acknowledge any of them. After months of fighting, Matt was finally able to get a copy of Emma's medical records. His lawyer brought those, along with two pediatric medical experts, to court. Each expert testified clearly and in detail that Emma's symptoms and blood work show either neonatal rickets or osteogenesis. Both are rare chronic illnesses that primarily affect infants. The experts also testified that there was absolutely no signs of abuse and that Emma needed medical care for these conditions immediately. Now, I will admit, there's not a ton of information out there about either one of these diagnoses, but if you dig, you can find it. Their judge apparently not only didn't want to dig, she didn't want to take the time to try and understand what the experts had very plainly laid out for her. She decided to throw out the expert's testimony, and she ruled that the emergency room doctor who made the initial report would be the only physician permitted to testify to any medical elements in this case. The ER doctor's testimony was that Emma's injuries were consistent with child abuse cases. Even though we know swelling of the leg, rash on the feet, and blood work indicator that can't come from abuse are not signs of abuse. On cross-examination, the doctor admitted he knew nothing about neonatal rickets or osteogenesis. The family's lawyer asked him if he had taken time to research these conditions after the experts provided those as likely answers to Emma's issues, and he said no. When asked if he brought Emma's records to show the court any and all indicators of abuse, again, he said no. Finally, the ER doctor was asked if he brought or if he can share information and statistics that show how Emma's issues are consistent with abuse. The doctor who started this whole thing and who was putting this family through hell responded by saying, well, you can look it up on the internet. Okay, I guess that's happening. Welcome to Medical Kidnapping, sponsored by a judicial system that only wants what's easy. Now that this court and case existed in make-believe land, we'll check in on reality. CPS was responsible for scheduling Matt's visitation times. So they scheduled his visitation for the exact same day and time as the court hearing. Knowing that he can't be in two places at once, Matt had to choose. He decided to go to court because he wanted his girls back, not just to visit them. Matt made this very clear to CPS so that they knew that visitation was not going to happen. In all of their wisdom, what did they do? They brought those little girls to the scheduled visitation and had them wait. Emma was too little to understand what was going on, but Aria, all that little girl knows is that Daddy didn't show up. An assault in an already horrific wound because he missed visitation, CPS has cut visitation time in half. This whole thing makes me nauseous. So let's talk about a little bit of good news. This situation in this case was not brought to the public's attention by the family, which is where we usually get this kind of information. This case was brought to the public's attention by one of the foster families that had hosted the girls. They saw how desperately the girls wanted to go home, but it didn't really make sense with the story CPS was telling them. Something wasn't adding up, so they started digging. It was then that this long-standing foster family discovered that there is no parental misconduct in this case. The only abuse is the state using their power to cover up the baseless decision to seize the children and their complete disinterest in learning about or even just acknowledging Emma's medical condition. The worst part of all of this is that their story isn't unique. This happens every single day. A woman named Ginny lost one of her 4 children to medical kidnapping when an emergency room doctor called CPS to report neglect and abuse because of her 6-year-old daughter's size and stature. Her daughter had been diagnosed with failure to thrive at 6 months old, and she had been working very closely with doctors ever since. This was all very well documented and provided to the emergency room doctor and staff. They decided to ignore that, report her to CPS, and take immediate custody of her child. Both of these cases highlight the lack of education and even awareness of chronic illnesses and how they can present, especially in emergency rooms or in acute situations. Most emergency services or personnel are looking for things that they can see and address quickly, yet most chronic illnesses are invisible. But that doesn't make them imaginary. People believe in things that we can't see all the time. People believe in love, and that's invisible. People believe in thought and prayer, and all of that is invisible. Why would it be any different with chronic illnesses and diseases? Recently, Maya Kwilinski won a huge judgment against a hospital and their staff for their role in her medical kidnapping, as well as the physical, mental, and emotional abuse she endured while in their custody. The family also received a judgment against the hospital for the emotional and mental abuse that they suffered and that directly led to the mother's suicide. Many things went horribly wrong in that case, including a judge that didn't want to hear or understand a chronic illness. Medical kidnapping started in 1706 and is getting exponentially larger and scarier with each passing year. This is everyone's problem, and I say everyone because it can happen to anyone. We all need to pay attention to this and demand reform before more victims are in court begging to be listened to. This case is really interesting. It was very widely publicized, but there's another piece to it that most people don't know, and it might help you understand why medical kidnapping is happening so frequently and so easily. In February of 2013, Justina's parents took her to Boston Children's Hospital, the award-winning renowned teaching facility associated with Harvard. Instead of the care you would expect from an award-winning children's hospital, Justina was medically kidnapped when the doctors decided that she didn't suffer from well-documented chronic illnesses. Instead, they insisted she was experiencing Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It's a somatoform disorder, which is basically like a fancy way of saying hypochondria. Justina's parents were informed that the state was taking their daughter into emergency medical custody, then removed from the hospital. Justina was moved from the neurology department to the hospital's locked psychiatric ward, where they held her captive for the next 16 months. All while enduring various forms of mental, physical, and emotional torture, her chronic illnesses were ravaging her body unmanaged and untreated. Justina's parents began speaking out publicly about their daughter. Luckily, Justina's campaign grabbed the attention of Martin Gatzfeld, known online as Marty G. At the time, he was a 30-year-old computer security expert and committed to fighting for the rights of institutionalized children. He had no relationship to Justina or her family, but he decided to act. Being a survivor of abuse himself, this kind of institutionalized abuse was something he was passionate about fighting. When Justina had still not been released, Marty G coordinated an online sit-in during the hospital's largest annual fundraiser. The sit-in caused their sites to crash, making the hospital's fundraiser fairly unsuccessful. In a statement to the Huffington Post in 2016, Marty stated, "I'd have to hit children where they appeared to care most, pocketbook and reputation. All other efforts to protect Justina weren't succeeding and time was of the essence." Almost unbelievably, they kept their donation page on the same public network as the rest of their stuff. Rookie mistake. He knew that patient and medical records would not be affected by this cyber sit-in, but it would get the hospital's attention while ensuring that they were thoroughly embarrassed. On June 17th of 2014, the judge finally dismissed the case and Justina was able to return home the next day. When Marty G found out, his only thought was mission accomplished. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. Justina was not the first child that Martin fought for. He spent years fighting for the basic human rights of institutionalized children. He made no money doing this. He and his wife even opened their guest bedroom at times to survivors of the troubled teen industry. In April of 2014, the FBI began investigating the cyber attacks on the hospital's computer network and traced the original video for Justina back to Marty G's account. He admitted that he purposely didn't bother covering his tracks because he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. When it came time to decide what they were going to do with Martin about this coordinated online sit-in, there were lots of opinions. He was just trying to help a teen who had been medically kidnapped and was being tortured. The FBI arrested him on February 17, 2016. He then spent more than a year behind bars without bail, waiting for a court date. His time included 80 days in solitary confinement, time in the same jail as El Chapo, and they refused his request to attend his own father's funeral. The court did everything possible to silence Martin from the moment they arrested him, limiting his communication with his wife, refusing to allow any media interviews or phone calls. Eventually, they even cut off his access to the prison's email system. In 2018, U.S. Attorney Ortiz attempted and failed to convince a jury that anything Martin did during his defense of Justina had the potential to affect the care or safety of even a single patient. They failed because the cyber sit-in posed no such risk. Martin made sure of that. Ortiz was throwing every resource he had at prosecuting Martin. Yet when it was time for Ortiz to help Justina and her family, his office was silent. The judge finally set a court date for January of 2018. By August, he was found guilty on 2 counts, but it wasn't until January of 2019 that the judge finally sentenced him. He ordered Martin to pay $443,000 in restitution, sentenced him to 121 months in prison to be followed by 3 years supervised release. The judge also added extra restrictions to his imprisonment time, like only being allowed 2 15-minute calls a week between him and his wife, and that he would be required to stay in his cell for 22 hours a day. In June of 2023, Martin was transferred to house arrest. The conditions of that transfer and what's happening now are a little unclear. Martin was tried and convicted using a law written 10 years earlier designed to protect big sites like Department of Defense or Social Security from being hacked, not someone sending so much data to a fundraising page that it crashes the site. So how was Martin convicted? Why was he convicted? He was just trying to help a family and a teenager who was being held against her will and tortured. He was convicted the same way Justina and so many others are medically kidnapped. Connections, ego, and a loose interpretation of certain laws. So let me share a little bit about what Martin was up against. Martin's lawyer, his wife, and countless others have taken the time to break down how everything happened. And it really does show you exactly how they're getting away with it and why it is that connections, egos, and loose interpretations are what's allowing all of this to continue. The trial judges assigned to Martin's case had deep connections to Boston Children's Hospital and its parent, Harvard Medical School. The Honorable Magistrate Judge Marianne Bowler, who signed the search warrant for Martin's home and denied him bail, started her career as a medical research assistant at Harvard Medical School. She was also married to Mark Pfeiffer, a Harvard cardiology professor and cardiologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is a cardiac facility with close ties to Boston Children's Hospital. Judge Bowler was also the director of the Boston Foundation, which raised hundreds and thousands of dollars for Boston's Children's Hospital and their psychiatric ward where Justina had been held. Maybe just an innocent coincidence? Yeah, right. It gets better or worse. Martin's trial judge was Nathaniel Gorton. During this case, Judge Gorton was a director of and shareholder in his family's for-profit business, Slade Gorton & Co., which donates to Boston Children's Hospital. In fact, Children's Hospital had a big thank you to Slade Gorton & Co. on their donation page on the same website that crashed during the cyber sit-in and after when it was all restored. Interestingly, during the Peltiers and Martin's court case, Boston Children's Hospital hid its donor list page, maybe to protect companies like Slade, Gorton & Co., or to hide the connection between the judges and one of the parties involved in the case. Oh, and guess what? Judge Gorton and his brother, Michael Gorton, both served on boards at the New England Home for Little Wanderers. And that facility recently received a very generous $50,000 direct grant from Boston Children's Hospital. Now get this, during the trial, but after jury selection, one of Martin's jurors self-identified as a former accountant for the New England Home for Little Wanderers. She told Judge Gorton in no uncertain terms that she was worried her background could create the opportunity for a mistrial. She was right, by the way. However, Judge Gorton refused to excuse her from the case. Can you believe that? Ready for some real fun? Or the part that'll make your stomach flip? After closing argument, the jury was deadlocked for days. So Judge Gorton began repeatedly telling the jury that they could not acquit Martin because they believed he had a good motive. Then prosecutors instructed the deadlocked jury they must convict Martin. Judge Gorton did not step in to correct the statement or make note that it was a biased instruction. One juror even came forward during deliberations, pleading with their peers to not convict Martin. They even went to Judge Gorton expressing their extreme discomfort and intense pressure from other jurors. Judge Gorton offered no assistance. And in fact, he even refused Martin's attorney's motion to inquire upon the jury to determine if pressure of any kind was being exerted during deliberations. In case you were wondering, neither Magistrate Bowler nor Judge Gorton agreed to recuse themselves due to conflict when counsel requested new judges. These issues are deep and they're systemic. We all think this could never happen to us, but so did Justina, her family, and Martin. Can you imagine if you had no idea where your child was or what treatment they were receiving? That's exactly what happened to Christina Dixon. She didn't know where her daughter Kylie was or what type of medical treatment she was receiving. Her 13-year-old daughter had cancer, but was removed from her mother's care after they refused to continue chemotherapy. Kylie Dixon was diagnosed in February of 2018 at just 11 years old after a mass inside her liver ruptured and caused internal bleeding. She underwent aggressive treatment for a rare kind of liver cancer. After 6 months of treatment, Kylie had had enough and she begged her mother, Christina, to take her home. The hospital released Kylie, and once they were home, they started using alternative treatments, including vitamins, herbs, and pure CBD oil to treat cancer and to build her body back up. According to records presented at Christina's trial, Kylie's tumor reduced in size by 90% during that first year of alternative care. Kylie was feeling better, cancer was shrinking, her body was recovering from all the chemotherapy, and life seemed to be going in the right direction for both mother and daughter, until Oregon's Child Protective Services got involved. Although the hospital released Kylie in 2018, they filed an emergency motion in March of 2019, claiming that the mother had neglected the child's medical needs. In fact, the motion read, "The child has been previously diagnosed with cancer, specifically an embryonal sarcoma. After initially seeking treatment, mother withdrew the child from treatment against medical advice. Mother has elected to treat her child's cancer exclusively with CBD oil, which is not medically recognized treatment for the disease with which the child has been diagnosed." On June 7th of 2019, so this is 2 years after the hospital discharged Kylie and 15 months after the hospital filed their emergency order, a county circuit court issued a pickup order for Kylie Dixon and ordered that she be placed in the custody of the state's child welfare agency. Unsure of where mother and daughter were, the state decided to send out an alert asking for help. They said that Kylie was in desperate need of care and that her mother, Christine, had taken her out of the hospital and on the run. After a few days, mother and daughter were found in a hotel in Nevada. Kylie was taken into protective custody and transferred back to Oregon, where she was placed in foster care. Her mother, Christina, was not arrested at that time, but was told that no additional information would be shared with her about the location or types of treatments that Kylie would be undergoing. Kylie was distraught. She even made YouTube videos begging to be reunited with her mom and for them to be allowed to determine her course of treatment. In the video, Kylie asks, "How is this fair to me? Nobody fights for me besides my mom, and you took her." She even read directly from her diary during the tearful 4-minute video. After forcefully keeping mother and daughter apart and monitoring all communications, the court ruled in July of 2019 that the state would now be making all of Kylie's medical decisions. As you may expect, the family was devastated. As Kylie began treatments, Christina was facing felony charges and was officially booked into county jail in August of 2019 after turning herself in to police. On November 17th, she was convicted of first-degree custodial interference and 2 counts of first-degree criminal mistreatment. She was facing up to 19 months in prison. I'm not sure what's more heartbreaking, a child being put through treatments they don't want, a mother and daughter being forcefully separated, or a mother facing time in jail because she was doing what she thought was the best thing for her daughter. On Christmas Day in 2016, Alyssa suffered a brain aneurysm at home in Minnesota. Surgeons explained that they needed to relieve the pressure on her brain. They gave her only a 2% chance to live and said that her prognosis was very grim. Her parents begged to have her transferred to the Mayo Clinic since the main campus was just 85 miles away. Unfortunately, there was an ice storm that night, so it took about 9 hours to get her there. She survived thanks to 4 brain surgeries, and her doctors were ecstatic. After just a month, she was transferred from neurology into the rehabilitation unit. On the neurology floor, things had always gone very smoothly, but that was not the experience they were having with the rehab staff. They wanted to take Alyssa off oxycodone, even though her fourth surgery had just been a couple days prior. Her parents discovered that her breathing tube was the wrong size, and they actually had to ask repeatedly to get it corrected. It was the family, not the doctors, that also discovered she had a bladder infection. They were concerned that the hospital social worker decided to discuss very private medical and financial information in front of strangers, friends, and relatives. Needless to say, their time in the rehabilitation unit was not conflict free. The family asked that a new social worker and a new rehab doctor be assigned so together they could all come up with the right plan to get Alyssa home. The meeting didn't go well. The family was frustrated, and the next day, Alyssa's mom was escorted out of the hospital and informed that she was no longer allowed on the property or to participate in any of her daughter's medical care or decisions. The doctors then informed her stepfather, Dwayne, that he could stay, but he would not be allowed to have any involvement in her care. Alyssa, who was now a legal adult, says that she started asking doctors and nurses to transfer her to a different facility. She asked multiple times a day, and all requests were ignored. Unbeknownst to the family, a Mayo social worker went to Adult Protective Services in 2 different counties trying to gain guardianship over Alyssa. Alyssa and her family had no idea any of this was happening, but they did notice that the hospital was trying very hard to isolate Alyssa. The hospital even assigned 2 nurses to stand guard at Alyssa's room. She felt like a prisoner. A few days later, the hospital staff confiscated Alyssa's cell phone, laptop, and tablet after learning of a video she made for her mom with a plea to transfer out and to tell her mom that she loves her and she missed her. The hospital banned any visitors from bringing in their own devices. They revoked the family's ability to stay the night with Alyssa, and they banned all family or friends from attending any therapy or treatment sessions and pushed back her discharge date pretty significantly. On top of that, those 2 guards are now going to be there 24/7. Amber, desperate to find help, reached out to her friend Mark, who at the time was a member of the board of directors for the Mayo Clinic's health system in Minnesota. However, even his pull wasn't enough. Alyssa's parents enlisted the help of Carrie Rigo, an attorney and patient advocate. Rigo spoke on the phone with Joshua Murphy, Mayo's chief legal officer, and faxed him a letter urging Mayo to transfer Alyssa to another facility, stating, given what has happened here, an expedited transfer this coming week would be best for everyone. The only response was someone in Murphy's office stating that they can't talk about Alyssa's situation. Finally came up with an idea. One of the guard nurses had been there a few weeks earlier when Alyssa's great-grandmother came for a visit. The nurse knew that she had just had knee surgery and was fragile. If they told her that Grandma Betty wanted to visit but couldn't make it all the way upstairs to Alyssa's room, they might just believe them. On February 28th of 2017, they started by downloading an AMA form for Alyssa to sign. Around 4 p.m., with his 9-year-old daughter Allie secretly recording the entire process with a small GoPro camera. Dwayne told the nurses he wanted to take Alyssa downstairs to say hello to Grandma Betty. They wanted the videotape to prove that Alyssa left the hospital willingly and that no one was violent with the staff or anyone else, and to record any actions taken by Mayo employees. In the video, you can see Dwayne pushing Alyssa in her wheelchair with 2 women in scrubs following close behind. Those were the guards. When they arrive in the lobby, there is no Grandma Betty, but Dwayne says he sees her car at the entrance. As they approach, the front passenger door opens, but there's no Grandma Betty. Instead, it was Alyssa's mom telling her to get in if she was ready to go home. You can see Dwayne help his stepdaughter out of the wheelchair and into the passenger seat, while the 2 guard nurses run towards them, yelling, "No!" The video shows a nursing aide grabbing Alyssa's arm, but Dwayne yelled, "Get your hands off my daughter." Dwayne closes the door, gets in the back seat, and you can hear him yelling, "Go, go, go," as the car takes off. The Mayo Clinic staff immediately called the police, claiming that a patient was abducted, that Alyssa cannot make decisions for herself, and that her mother couldn't care for her because Amber has mental health issues. None of which was true or anything they could prove. Mayo's social worker also told the police that she'd been trying to get emergency guardianship, but had been unable to get the appropriate court orders. Nothing was adding up for John Sherwin, the captain of investigations for the Rochester Police Department. It quickly became clear to him that Alyssa, in fact, could make her own decisions, including the decision to leave the hospital against medical advice, although he was still concerned about her health based on what Mayo was telling them. Mayo sent the police an order for a 72-hour hold, which allows police to admit someone to a hospital emergency room against their will if they're a danger to themselves or others. But first, they had to find her. The police pinged their cell phones. This pointed them to an area about 85 miles west of Rochester. Officers searched the area but didn't find them. The family was actually just down the street at Walmart purchasing a wheelchair, a walker, and a syringe for Alyssa's feeding tube, which Dwayne had already been trained on how to use. They then checked into a nearby hotel. Well, at the hotel, they received a call from a deputy asking about Alyssa's status, and they told the deputy that their daughter was doing well and they planned to bring her to a doctor the next day. The deputy said that that wasn't good enough, and they were on their way to pick them all up. Alyssa and her parents scrambled, and they all left the hotel as fast as they could. A sheriff's deputy called them again, urging them to take Alyssa to a hospital immediately. They agreed to take her to a hospital in Jackson, about 75 miles away. They'd chosen Jackson because it had a hospital that was not owned by Mayo, but they weren't sure if that hospital would still transfer to Mayo since it was still relatively close. So they changed their mind and kept driving. A few hours later, Alyssa arrived at the Sanford Medical Center in Sioux Falls, a teaching hospital for the University of South Dakota. They explained the situation to the Sanford doctors and their decision to leave Mayo Clinic AMA. The Sanford doctors disagreed with Mayo on two very crucial points. Mayo insisted that Alyssa needed to be in the hospital, but Sanford doctors came to the decision that she was perfectly safe to go home with her prescribed medications and instructions on follow-up care. Mayo also claimed that Alyssa lacked the mental capacity to make her own decisions, but Sanford doctors again disagreed and found her well within her capabilities to make her own decisions. When the police learned that a hospital had cleared Alyssa to go home, they stepped aside. Alyssa and her parents had done nothing illegal, and no charges would or could ever be filed against them. A few days after her visit to the Sanford emergency room, Alyssa and her parents went home to find a letter from Mayo Clinic thanking them for getting in touch with the Patient Experience Office. Ironically, the letter was dated the day after Alyssa escaped. They received a second letter from Mayo that stated they would never be willing to treat Alyssa, her parents, or any family member due to their obvious lack of trust in their capabilities. Eventually, Alyssa went back to finish her senior year of high school. She graduated to a standing ovation from her classmates, and Alyssa was named prom queen. Today, she is happy, healthy, and living a very full, meaningful life on her terms. I have to warn you, this one's really hard to hear. In August of 2013, Memphis DCS removed 8-month-old Xavier and his 2-year-old sibling from their parents after it was decided that Anna Mosley and her husband didn't have the sufficient training to care for Xavier's DeGeorge syndrome, even though they had been successfully caring for his older sibling with the same infliction for the past 2 years. DeGeorge syndrome is a genetic disorder that causes poor development of important bodily function, and while there's no cure, treatments can help with some of the more critical health issues or concerns. Once this new determination was made, DCS seized both children and placed them in protective medical custody, aka foster care, until the parents could complete a series of courses that the state had selected. After expensive legal battles, classes, and desperate attempts to regain custody of their two small children, a return date was finally set for the end of October. Unfortunately, on that date, DCS discovered that the father was missing a 1 hour credit and canceled the return of the children. The parents were devastated. Even more so when 2 weeks later, on November 17th, the now 11-month-old Xavier was found dead in his protective medical care placement, or his foster home. Paramedics reportedly found the child with a wet wipe stuffed deep within his mouth. According to the family's attorney, the only information that DCS provided was a 9 to 11 word email saying, "Your child died basically because the heart stopped beating, which is the cause of death for everyone." After numerous requests for more information, the family was finally told about the wet wipe that was discovered by paramedics, but they were also told that the older sibling would not be returned and no additional information would be provided until they completed their investigation, which legally they had 60 days to do. By the end of February 2014, so more than 60 days later, Anna Mosley still had no additional information about the death of her son, was still not reunited with her toddler, and was now fighting this battle alone because sadly, the father passed away in a car accident in December before he could get any answers about his children. Sierra Riddle was a Colorado mother who was just trying to help her 3-year-old son Landon battle leukemia. Landon began a very aggressive chemotherapy and radiation treatment plan. His mother said that the treatments reduced the tumors, but they made her son very sick. They were watching their little boy become violently ill. He was suffering nerve damage in his legs. He was constantly nauseous and vomiting. He had uncontrollable pain and was struggling to eat or drink anything at all. Desperate for a way to help her son, she started looking into alternative treatments and found information about medical marijuana protocols. She found users that said that the THC, so the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, can be an effective painkiller and alleviate nausea. She also found research from scientists at California Pacific Medical Center that suggests that CBD, the non-psychotic compound found in cannabis, could actually stop the metastasis of many kinds of aggressive cancer. Willing to try absolutely anything, Sierra moved her family from Utah to Colorado because of the state's marijuana laws, and she traded Landon's chemo for cannabis therapy. Over time, Landon returned to his old energetic self, and his cancer went into remission. Her decision to trade chemo for medical marijuana not welcomed by everyone, including a Colorado doctor who was working with Landon's original team back in Utah. They decided to report Sierra to CPS. CPS suggested mediation, or at least a meeting between everybody to see if they could find some common ground before going to court. In the meeting, their interaction with CPS went a lot better than they were expecting. They said that CPS did a good job trying to mediate the meeting between the doctors and the family, and they expressed how grateful they were that CPS was able to give them an unexpected amount of support. The doctors were another story. The oncologist was arrogant, rude, condescending, and made sure to repeatedly remind everyone that he was the only expert in the room. However, not only had he never seen Landon, never examined Landon, he had never even bothered to review his chart. The doctor had no idea what his last chemo treatment was, the fact that he was in remission, what his last scan said. He knew nothing. All he did was spout facts and data about leukemia and chemotherapy treatments. He had no interest in anything the family had to say, and even less interest in anything to do with a medical marijuana treatment plan. The doctor finally agreed to at least look at Landon's chart and maybe find a treatment plan that would be more individualized to Landon. Hoping for a better outcome, Landon's family and CPS showed up to the meeting where they learned that the only concession the doctor was willing to make was to cut the steroid dose at one point in the treatment program in half. Everything else was going to stay the exact same. The family was heartbroken. Not only was this provider not listening to them, they knew that this meant they had to go to court. And without being able to call their own oncologist or chemotherapy expert to testify in court that there are other successful options to treat cancer, the family knew they would lose their case. They were terrified that Landon would have no choice but to start chemotherapy again, even though he was in remission. Luckily, when it came to their day in court, Landon's family and their lawyer were able to successfully argue for Landon's right of compassionate care. Since then, he's been in remission and cancer-free. In Florida, professional guardian Rebecca Farrell has resigned after an investigation revealed that she had filed unauthorized do not resuscitate orders on almost all of her senior patients against the wishes of the patients and their families. An investigation started with the death of 75-year-old Stephen Stryker. Judge Thorpe examined Stephen's final days and found that Rebecca had abused her powers. The investigation concluded that she had acted in bad faith and refused to remove the DNR despite Stryker's expressed desire for life-saving actions, which were supported by testimony from his daughter, his friends, and a psychiatrist. Luckily, Judge Thorpe removed Rebecca from 95 other Orange County cases. Unfortunately, he did it in a sealed hearing so that the media and the general public couldn't see just how far this abuse had gone. In 2013, Anna and Alex's baby Sammy was medically kidnapped by Child Protective Services in Sacramento, California. The parents had taken their 5-month-old to a local hospital, but received very poor care. So when the doctors there recommended immediate heart surgery, the parents weren't very comfortable. They made it clear that they wanted to get a second opinion and would want that surgery to be done in a pediatric hospital with a specialized cardiac unit. Well, the hospital didn't like that answer, but the parents wanted the best for their infant and knew that was not what they were going to get at that hospital. So they left and they took Sammy straight to a hospital that had a pediatric cardiac unit. Sammy received excellent care. The family and the physicians made a clear treatment plan that everyone was comfortable with, and Sammy was properly discharged to his parents by the new physician. While surgery needed to happen, they had determined that there was no immediate danger. Remember when I said the first hospital really didn't like the idea of them taking the baby to get a second opinion? Well, they decided to report the couple to Child Protective Services and the Sacramento police, who showed up at the parents' home the next day to forcefully take Sammy into state custody. I say forcefully because when the police arrived, Alex was in the front yard. The police immediately forced him to the ground, handcuffed him, and held him there until they left. While Alex was pinned to the ground outside, the police forced their way into the home and actually pulled Sammy out of his mother's arms. The entire incident was caught on camera, and it's heartbreaking to see the amount of force and the lack of empathy used in this situation. The social workers wouldn't tell the parents where they were taking their 5-month-old breastfeeding infant, and the police refused to even review the hospital discharge documents that would prove that their baby was seen and properly discharged by a physician from the second hospital on that same day. While it may not sound like it, the family was actually very lucky. A judge reunited the couple with their baby after only 1 week, and before allowing that first hospital to do any kind of surgery or medical treatments to Sammy. In 2018, a group of Minnesota parents filed a civil rights lawsuit against Dakota County and the state of Minnesota for medically kidnapping their children and placing them into foster care. The lead plaintiff in the lawsuit was Dwight Mitchell, who had his 3 children removed from his home because a family babysitter reported him to CPS. Mitchell, a management consultant, said it was every parent's worst nightmare. My children were legally kidnapped for a bottom spanking that was done out of love because I want my children to grow up to be hardworking and good members of society. Mitchell's son was kept in state custody for 22 months and completely cut off from any communication from his dad. It all started on February 16th of 2014 when Mitchell and his wife went out and they left their kids with their longtime babysitter. The day before, Mitchell had spanked his son for stealing, overall disobedience, failing to do his homework, and playing video games without permission after bedtime. There was no mark, there was no bruising, but when the children told the babysitter about it, they decided to call CPS and file a report. The police were immediately dispatched to Mitchell's home, and all 3 children were taken to the police station for questioning. A few days later, a court petition was filed seeking immediate protection for Mitchell's children. The children were removed from his home and placed in foster care. In Minnesota, it is reportedly illegal to use corporal punishment with one's own children, but not in schools where it's allowed by teachers. So a teacher could give Mitchell's children a spanking, but he couldn't. Mitchell has said that Xavier, his son, who received the spanking, has never been the same. He shared that the abduction by Child Protective Services ruined my son's life and changed it forever. Can you imagine if you thought your father abandoned you? No charges were ever filed against Mitchell or his wife, and eventually the children were returned to their care, but not without a lot of emotional and mental trauma. Marianne's daughter, Ariana, was born with a defective foot that required amputation of her leg below the knee. As Ariana approached middle school, she decided she wanted to go to public school rather than continuing her homeschool program. That meant catching her up on all of her immunizations. Marianne and her sister, Penny, started noticing a lot of changes in Ariana. They said that she began acting out of character, being irritated, having facial grimaces, all of these things that have been associated with immunization injuries. They really believed she was having some kind of adverse reaction. In 2011, desperate for some help, the family went to the Children's Center, an organization that helps families with at-risk children. The team worked together with the family to develop a medical and mental health treatment plan that everybody thought was going to be the best option for Ariana. However, her symptoms continued to get worse. Behavioral problems began, and although these issues were reported to the medical staff, no changes were being made. According to Ariana's father, the doctors had given her psychotropic drugs that made things worse. Marianne's decision to wean her from that was making a difference. It was helping her be a happy kid again. Ariana's father completely supported and agreed with Marianne tapering Ariana off this medication. Child Protective Services, however, disagreed. So they obtained a warrant to remove the 13-year-old by claiming that the mother was withholding her medication. When CPS and the police showed up, Marianne refused to surrender Ariana, and that started a 10-hour standoff with the police. The Detroit Special Response Team, SRT, responded and descended on the home with a tank and assault weapons. You can still find video footage of it on YouTube. It looks more like something out of a military movie than real life. As parents, it's our instinct to protect our children, and that's what Marianne was doing. In fact, she had such an amazing reputation within her community that during that 10-hour standoff, numerous community members offered to help with the negotiations, including ministers and community activists that had worked with Marianne in the past. In the end, it was Judge Deborah Thomas, a former polio sufferer and advocate for the disabled, who finally convinced the 56-year-old mother to surrender her daughter. Judge Thomas reportedly promised that Ariana would be turned over to a relative, but instead the girl was taken into protective custody and placed in foster care. In the meantime, Mary Ann was arraigned on charges of firing a weapon in a dwelling, felonious assault, resisting and obstructing an officer, and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. Her bond was set at $500,000. Judge Deborah Thomas, who had worked with these courts, was quoted as saying, "I'm shocked by the amount of the bond. I never dreamed it would be set so high and that she wouldn't be free to care for her daughter." Child Protective Services was determined to force this 13-year-old to take a dangerous medication against her will and the will of her mother and father. The family's lawyer was even able to submit proof that this drug wasn't even approved by the FDA. Ariana's father, through all of it, completely supported Marianne and the decision she was making, of saying that she was setting an example for numerous other families, particularly in the Black community, whose children have been forcefully taken from them for questionable reasons. Yes, is interfering with her right as a parent to make the best possible decisions for her daughter's medical care. Mary Ann had to battle for 5 years against the criminal charges that were levied against her for refusing to drug her 13-year-old. Just 2 years after the end of her court battles, she passed away at the age of 63. Well, I'm sure Mary Ann and her daughter were very grateful for every second and every minute they had together. Pretty sure they would have rather spent the last 8 years of Mary Ann's life enjoying time together rather than fighting legal battles that all started from unsubstantiated claims of abuse and a mother trying to protect her daughter from being unnecessarily and forcefully drugged with a powerful and dangerous antipsychotic medication that wasn't even approved by the FDA. These stories are heartbreaking. And given the fact that the first documented case of medical kidnapping happened in 1706, this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of all the victims and their stories. I think we can all agree that there is a need for a system that protects and even rescues abused individuals quickly and discreetly. However, I struggle to see why reform is not at the top of everyone's to-do list. No one wants to talk about it because there is nothing worse than feeling completely powerless to stop something that shouldn't be happening in the first place. So we put on blinders, we avoid conflict, we even neglect our own health. This is how horrible things happen and continue to happen. The real question is, why are we allowing this to continue happening? If we really think about it, it's because this system that causes harm to some also saves others, and we can't risk losing that. Nothing I say, nothing I give you, nothing I share with you will guarantee that this will never happen to you or a loved one. What I can do is give you information that can hopefully help you prevent a medical kidnapping. The rights of parents to care for and make decisions on behalf of their children is a right that is protected under the U.S. Constitution and has been upheld numerous times by the U.S. Supreme Court. This includes medical and financial decisions and the right to accept or reject medical treatments. However, when advocacy turns adversarial, the medical community can utilize their close relationship with the state and different authorities to act quickly, for better or for worse. We have to remember that not everyone that wears a white coat or that works in the medical industry is our friend. And if we want to protect our families from unwanted intrusions or protect our rights to make medical decisions for our kids, we have to start being very strategic about where and who treats our loved ones and what information we're sharing with them. It may be necessary to change our approach or do some advanced healthcare planning because the wrong choice, trusting the wrong person, or not telling someone enough information can all have catastrophic consequences. This was the situation in many of the stories that I shared with you. I've seen lots of debates and read lots of opinions and studies about this, and many say that that relationship between the medical community and the state or the proper authorities should be severed, more strictly regulated, or made completely transparent. That can't happen. Many of our most vulnerable rely on that system. A battered wife or an abused child can safely get the help they need. The victim of an abduction or sex trafficking can escape their captors and disappear behind those scrubs and behind those white coats because there is a carefully orchestrated process that can work and act very quickly. Been in hospitals where they order a urine test on every single woman, no matter what. When you go in, they have a sign and it said, write your initials in black if you are safe. Write them in red if you need help. We can get you help and no one will know. Brilliant, right? While this is incredible and it does save lives, when you see the worst of the worst all day, every day, easy to start seeing the worst everywhere you look. Medical providers are required by law to report anything that may indicate abuse, especially if a child or an invalid adult is involved. If you're a parent, then every single time that you and your child go to the doctor or receive care, you are both being watched for any telltale signs of neglect or abuse. Where everything seems to fall apart is when parents and physicians disagree and protective services can redefine child abuse to apply to just about any situation where they want to use it. It's during these investigations where kids can be put into foster care, parental rights can be stripped away, adults can be sent to care homes, children can be put up for adoption, even when there's no proof of neglect, abuse, or abandonment. When the investigation ends, even if no charges are filed, these create a strain on the parents that never really goes away, and it becomes a factor in everything they ever do with their child. Parents have reported losing jobs. They've had trouble looking for rental homes or apartments because of these investigations. We all have to ask, what can we do to prevent families and loved ones from becoming a victim of unnecessary medical kidnapping? There's nothing I can say, nothing I can share with you that will 100% guarantee that this will never happen to you or a loved one. What I can give you is 10 things that you should know, information that can hopefully prevent or help you in case, God forbid, this does happen. First, don't assume this would never happen to you. It can. It happens every day, everywhere, to all types of people, colors, creed, religion, everything. No one is exempt from this. Number two, if you are co-parenting, get on the same page about everything medical. Without this, the whole situation can get really ugly, and it puts the doctor and your child in the middle of something that can become very volatile. It also leaves an opening for a doctor or CPS to divide and conquer. You want one voice, one team, one message when it comes to anything medical. There's no room for miscommunication there. Number three, document everything, record or take notes at every conversation with a provider. Include the name, dates, time, vitals if they're taken, next steps, everything. Each time a test comes back, if you don't have access to them through patient portal, ask your doctor or the staff for paper copies. HIPAA laws require hospitals and medical providers to give you copies of anything and everything in your medical chart anytime you ask. If you want more information on how to ask and how powerful your medical chart really is, go check out my episode about that. It will really help you here. Number four, watch what you say, who you say it to, and take the time to build trust. If you're in an emergency situation where you don't have that time, share facts only. A white coat, an MD, scrubs, none of that means that they are your friend or that they are guaranteed to do right by you. Give them all the information they need in order to properly treat you or your child, but you don't need to expand or provide additional color or insight. They need facts, dates, and information. That's it. Number five, stay informed, research, and learn their language. If you don't know what you don't know, it becomes really difficult to make educated medical decisions. This is one of the ways that medical kidnapping happens. They just assume you don't know better, and the doctors do. So if you're researching and reading everything you can, that doesn't make you an expert. It doesn't make you a doctor, but it does allow you to start asking questions and have a better understanding of their answers. When you ask them questions in their lingo, you are a lot more likely to get a detailed answer. And even if you don't understand everything they're saying, you're taking notes and you can always look it up later. Number 6. This one's hard to do, especially when it comes to your child, but it's so important. Eliminate emotions from any and all communications. You may have noticed that your doctor, nurses, staff, they all have very stone-like facades. They learned in medical school they can't have emotional responses to every patient and every part of their day. If they did, they wouldn't make it through their shift, let alone come back the next day. Emotional pleas, language, and outbursts are muted in their brain. Instead, focus on facts and action steps. Keep it straightforward. You're going to get a lot more information that way, and then turn to your friends, family, or loved ones for that emotional care and comfort. Number 7, know and understand the Child Protective Services or Family Services practices and regulations in your area. Once they get involved, your interactions with them will not be enjoyable. Decisions about your child, about their health, finances, even how they're raised, you're no longer making those alone. They now have a say and can even force you to do things that you don't want to do. They can force your child to go to public school instead of being homeschooled. They can even get court orders to medicate your child. And once you become entangled in that CPS and family services system, it's pretty difficult to get that autonomy back. Sometimes it's lost forever. And if you don't obey, then you might lose your children. What kind of choice is that? Number 8, avoid the emergency room as much as possible. If your child becomes seriously ill or is in horrific pain, then please go immediately. But most medical kidnappings begin the same way. A parent takes a sick child to the hospital thinking they're proactively seeking medical help, and CPS is brought in. Avoid the situation by sticking with providers and physicians that you have built a relationship and built trust with as much as possible. Number 9, if your child has a chronic, rare, or life-threatening illness, be ready to fight. In these situations, a lot of providers will suggest experimental or new treatments. And if you don't agree immediately, doctors and even CPS can see it as you endangering your child by not giving them this care that could potentially help them. However, there's a shocking amount of information that is coming out that by gaining custody, CPS can keep them in medical testing and trials without the patient or the parent's knowledge or permission. Number 10, last but not least, get help. You can ask for the hospital's ethics board or chairman, but do not allow it to be anyone from risk management. Risk management is there to protect the hospital and the doctors, not the patients. Engage a neutral third-party patient advocate. There are companies that specialize in this type of service, and some insurance companies even offer advocacy services as part of your plan. You could also hire an attorney with experience in both family and medical law that is practicing in your area. Finding an attorney with experience in both of these areas is not always easy, but you can ensure that everything's documented and that you're communicating with the provider in good faith. Always have your significant other, an advocate, your lawyer, or any other trusted adult that can confirm any and all conversations that you have with the provider or Child Protective Services. When it comes down to your word versus theirs, you can prove what the conversation was. These stories are heartbreaking. You can learn more about it online. There's even a Facebook group where parents try and help each other share documents, share advice. They even have a list of children that have died in emergency medical custody. I don't know what the right answer is. I know we need a system, something in place to help abducted, abused, trafficked individuals quickly and discreetly. Also know that something's broken in the system when a trained doctor can claim abuse and neglect when a mom proactively seeks help for her son who is having a normal reaction to being weaned from breast milk, or takes custody of an 8-month-old to keep him safe, only to let him die from a wet wipe shoved in his mouth at the foster home. What do you even say to a 16-year-old boy suffering from an extremely painful chronic nerve condition when you rip him from his home, take away his family, and stick him in a foster home in one of the most dangerous cities in America, only for him to be sexually assaulted? I can't wrap my head around why a family would have to come up with an escape plan in order to help their 18-year-old, who is recovering from a brain aneurysm, leave the hospital. I don't know what the right answer is. I do know that while we figure it out, the only thing we can do is make sure that we keep ourselves and our loved ones as safe as we can in these situations. And most importantly, we keep talking about it. If we don't talk about this issue and we don't talk about the victims, nothing is going to change. That's how this has continued to happen for almost 320 years? This whole thing is sad and it breaks my heart, but we have to talk about it, because my hope and my prayer is that this never happens to you or your loved one. If you have a story, something like this has happened to you, I would love to hear from you. I think everyone has a story and everyone's story deserves to be heard. And I think we just find ways to support each other, even in these dark situations.
Now that you know what medical kidnapping is, how it happens, and ways to keep your family safe, share this information with everyone you know. The more people that know about this means the more people we have to help influence change and improvements to this process. Next week, we're going to talk about how the lost lessons of home ec can get you and your team talking without the eye rolls. It's a really fun episode, and I cannot wait to share it with you. Join me on socials for some sneak peeks and subscribe here so that you know as soon as that next episode is available. In the meantime, take care of yourself, my friend. I'll see you next week. Accessibility matters, so every podcast episode is available on your favorite platform and as a video with captions